Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. The Manitoba provincial election is scheduled for October the 3rd. Disability Matters Vote is encouraging Manitobans with disabilities to vote and watch how political parties are responding to disability concerns. Meagan Gillmore has spoken to one of the organization's representatives and can tell you more. Hey, good morning once again, Meagan.
Good morning, Dave.
So, Meagan, what is Disability Matters Votes?
Sure. So Disability Matters Vote has been around for like several years right now. But for those who are still new to the organization, it's a joint campaign of several disability organizations across Manitoba. So Abilities Manitoba is involved, Barrier Free Manitoba, Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities, and they all work together to encourage Manitobans with disabilities, first of all, just to vote. And to make sure that they are able to vote. But then they also promote disability issues throughout the election campaign and do their best to bring these concerns to the political parties and see how they're going to respond to different priority areas that have been identified.
So there's three prongs there. So let's start with what they have planned for the election campaign.
Sure. So first, the organization surveyed Manitobans with disabilities to see what their main priorities are in terms of this provincial election, and we'll just discuss those priorities in a moment. And then after they surveyed Manitobans with disabilities, so potential voters, the organization sent out questions to every candidate and to all the registered political parties in Manitoba. There's about 7 registered political parties, I believe, to see how disabilities impact the candidates' lives and to get their opinion on different matters related to disability, including the human rights cases related to disability, but also the priority issues that have been identified. And then today, this afternoon, 1 p.m. Manitoba time, the organization is hosting the Great Debate with party leaders about disability issues in the province.
So you mentioned that event coming up, and we'll plug that again before we get out here. But what are the main priorities?
Sure. So I spoke to Melissa Graham, who is a spokesperson with Disability Matters Vote, and she said that the organization surveyed individuals, like we said, to determine what their top 5 priorities are. And these priorities are accessible Manitoba, employment, skilled workforce, services and resources, and basic needs. And here's how Melissa explained each of those to me.
Our 5 priorities for this year are an accessible Manitoba, which includes things like we have the accessibility for Manitobans Act here and standards under that. Employment, where we're referring to getting people with disabilities employed. As a skilled workforce, which also includes like making sure staffing is well resourced and funded and wages for staff. All of that. Services and resources is where we're talking about like access to services. So we're talking about access to equipment here as well as different services that people with disabilities need. And then basic needs, which is the issue that the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities took on, and that covers social assistance and housing.
And the basic needs also includes advocating that the Canada Disability Benefit will not result in clawbacks from provincial benefits when and if it finally comes to fruition.
That's one you and I have talked about extensively. So how are the political parties responding to those issues and concerns?
Sure. So I first spoke to Melissa at the beginning of this month, at the end of August, somewhere around there, a few weeks ago. And at that time, Melissa says that many politicians were discussing the need for healthcare workers to have adequate wages. And she said that the attention on wages makes Disability Matters Vote work even more important.
One of the things that I know from speaking to candidates is that we've had a lot of people around us talking about the wage issue because it's an important issue with the economy being what it is. But I think it's important too that those other issues are getting emphasized because while workers have other voices to speak with them, like for them, like unions and that kind of thing, and it's good that we're adding to that. the importance of these priorities for me is that they come from community, and we don't have people out there in government every day lobbying for our issues. And I think that's why it's so important that we have these things that we're asking politicians to work on and do better.
So to date, Disability Matters Vote has received responses from 4 of Manitoba's political parties to their questions. So the Progressive Conservatives, which is the current governing party, the NDP, who I believe is the official opposition, the Liberals and the Greens have all responded to the organization's questions about disability issues in the election.
So, Meagan, that's prong number 1, the actual political issues inside the province. The other prong you mentioned was voting itself, the accessibility of voting. What are some of the details about accessible voting accommodations for the Manitoba election?
Sure. So there's a number of different ways that you can vote. If depending what your needs are. So you can vote from home if you're not able to leave your house because of your disability. You can also vote from the curbside if a voting area is inaccessible. So that's also your hint that not all polling stations in Manitoba may be completely accessible. There's also Braille templates available at all voting polls, and magnifiers and large print lists of candidates are available at the voting office. If you need ASL interpreters, you can request that, and Elections Manitoba will try to make sure that there are some available. And so just like anything, ask early to make sure that there's a better chance of you getting that.
And what are some of the key dates over the course of the next couple of weeks before people head to the polls for voting day on October the 3rd?
Right. So as I've already said, today is a key date because there's the great debate that starts at 1 p.m. Central and will also be live streamed on the website. September 22nd, so just a little over a week from today, is the last day to apply for absentee voting. And September 23rd to 30th is advanced voting. There are application forms to fill out for homebound voting and things like that are on Elections Manitoba's website. There's no date that I could find about when you need to actually send those applications in by. So just fill out the application earlier rather than later.
Yeah, earlier rather than later is a good policy in life, although as a procrastinator, I don't always practice what I preach. Meagan, you and I are both fond of democracy. I think you and I both fundamentally understand why voting is important. But what does the organization have to say about why people should cast a ballot?
Sure. So I asked Melissa Graham that question, and here's what she had to say.
I'll say 2 things to that. I'll say if you want to feel heard, you need to be part of the political process. And I think that's a big piece of what Disability Matter goes to. It provides a way for people with disabilities to get involved in that process. And if you want to know what candidates think to know whether you should vote for them, you should go to things like the debate and the different events that we're having, or you should call up your candidate and ask those questions, or ask the question when they come to your door. And you should vote based on the issues that you care about and who you think is best going to speak for you.
Yeah, so I'll just echo those thoughts. Dave, as you alluded to, you and I have spent many, many moments of our lives discussing the Canada Disability Benefit and all political things involved with that. And political involvement is a two-way street. So I don't think we can expect, really fairly, honestly, your political leaders or political candidates to really take your concerns seriously if you're not taking an effort to vote and be involved in the democratic process. It works both ways. And and we can go on and on about how some things aren't accessible or they don't seem to care about me or whatever. But at the end of the day, you have to show some good faith in this process and show that you are at least willing to try to be involved. I would also like to say you do have the right not to vote in this country.
Certainly.
And if you do not think that any of the available candidates represent your needs or you don't agree with any of their visions, it's actually best to still show up and vote. And then you can go, there's a different way you can do it. You can go and actually officially register that I am not voting for anybody because I don't have faith in anyone, and you will still get counted as a vote, which is different than spoiling your ballot, which just means that your ballot doesn't get counted anyways.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is a strong position as well, to say that I took the time to show up here today and I'm not even going to have a vote for someone. Meagan, I agree that advocacy is important, and certainly fundamentally you want politicians to be talking about accessibility and disability issues organically without being forced to do so. But it's just naive to think they will unless you form a voters bloc, right? That you need to form groups that are going to say you will be rewarded for offering me good policy. And sometimes that means you have to reward a government if you like what they're doing, and sometimes you need to punish a government to hold them accountable. You can't just think of politics as a team sport. Oh, I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, therefore I bleed these colors until I die. You need to actually grapple with the policies. So you're right, two-way street. Politicians need to tell you authentically what those policies are, not simply, I care about people with disabilities. No, but what are you going to do? And that's where I think an organization like Disability Votes Matter is like totally clear about that. We want to find out what you think, and we are also going to represent a block of people that want to hear what you think, that will reward you potentially with votes if you do a good job. I don't know if they end up endorsing candidates at the end of the day, but I also think that perhaps organizations, I'm not saying this group in particular, I'm saying organizations in general that represent people with disabilities might want to start getting in the habit of actually endorsing political parties. I know that's super controversial, but I do think there'd probably be something to be said, hey, we could potentially offer you a voting block if you listen to our concerns.
Yeah, that is one strategy. And one thing that I find interesting about this organization in Manitoba is that it is an initiative, a joint initiative of several different disability organizations, each who on their own individually have their own priorities that they focus on. But when it comes in terms of this larger gathering for an election, right, they come together and they find what are the common things that we all agree on, that we all want, and what are some areas of specific expertise that some of our organizations have that we can help lead the information gathering or the discussion around a specific area. For example, the Accessibilities with Manitobans Act or whatever, something like that. So there is a recognition that people have specific needs and things that they want, but also recognition that there are some general things. And I do think, as someone who has a disability and has worked for disability organizations and now covers it, one of the things that can hold the disability movement, if you want to use that phrase, back from political advocacy is we still splinter off a lot based on our individual needs. And like, I understand that I'm legally blind and most people acquire vision loss later in life. I acquired mine at birth. That's not a very common, statistically speaking, that's not a very common thing. There's not a lot of people like me, medically speaking, that way. Like, so it wouldn't make political sense for me to be like, hey, I'm going to create a whole platform based off of the specific needs of people who were born with vision loss and expect that that's enough to carry the day and get a whole sea of change. Like, you have to work together. You have to find something you can have in common. I'm not saying everyone needs to be the same, but I'm saying there needs to be some unity around important things, and we'll see how that works provincially. We're really going to see how that works federally with the House coming back in a few days and with discussions about the Canada Disability Benefit really ramping up.
Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.